So this is going to be on warranting and logical refutation. Now, this skill is obviously among the most important skills out there in debate. Warranting and logical refutation, this is something that comes up as often, if not more often, than every other skill. It's a skill where if you aren't super adept with it, it'll really come back to bite you because this is something that happens in almost every speech except the constructive. In rebuttal, you'll have to do this. In summary, you'll have to do this. In final focus, you'll have to do this. And so the only way to really guarantee that you're operating at peak performance is to get seriously good at this skill. So we're going to be going very in depth in this meeting on how to really get solid and become an excellent logical refuter and become a debater that really has a great grasp of warranting. So we'll start with the basics, right? What is warranting? This can be understood in a few different ways. The first is just the simple why behind your claim, right? So whenever you hear someone make a claim in debate, let's say affirming the resolution will cause a nuclear war. That is a claim. There needs to be a reason why doing the thing that they're talking about will ultimately cause that nuclear war. And without that, it's simply just a floating claim without a warrant. So you want to always make sure that any claims you're making have a reason why they are correct, or else they just won't be evaluated by the judge. Warranting can take on one of several different shades, right? Um, Sometimes the warranting can deal with who takes the action. It can deal with where the action happens. It can deal with what the action is, and it can deal with how the action actually winds up happening. And so this means that warranting can be fairly complex. Now, that's not to say that the better a warrant is, the more complex it is. A lot of the time, you want to try and gravitate towards the simplest arguments possible. And you can do that quite easily by just trying to synthesize and really distill just the core elements of the argument that you're trying to make. So, on a basic level, the warrant is the logical justification for the claim, right? So you'll be claiming whatever you want, but at the end of the day, the logical justification, the logos-based justification that will come out for that claim, it will be the warrant. So hopefully that makes sense to everyone so far, because that's really just basic stuff about what warranting is, right? It's really just the why behind your claims. So now let's talk about sub-warranting, right? So it's all fine and good to say, okay, yeah, sure, warranting is the reason why your argument is true. But very frequently, as you all will probably know, this tends to get quite complicated. A lot of the times, a warrant you'll make will necessitate some sort of sub-warrant for it to be true, right? So let's look at an example here. We have the claim debt hurts the economy. Okay, that is a claim. The warrant for this could be okay, debt hurts the economy because debt decreases spending power through greater interest payments, right? So whenever a country takes on more debt, that means that they have to pay off that debt. And let's say you take on $10 of debt, you're ultimately going to have to pay $11 back to that bank. And the difference there is called interest. And so debt would then decrease the spending power in an economy by increasing the amount of money that has to be given towards interest payments. So that's just sort of your top level warrant here, right? Sub warrant. So we look at debt decreases power through greater interest payments. We don't really get directly back to hurting the economy or contracting the economy. So what's the sub warrant here? The sub warrant here is that interest payments come from taxation. So whenever the government needs to take the difference to pay back another country, they need to do it through directly or indirectly taxing the other members of the population. Now, sometimes this is done through an indirect tax known as inflation or money printing. That's when the government essentially just decides it's going to create more currency, and in doing so, makes every bit of existing currency that you may or may not possess less valuable. So there's your sub warrant. So as you can see, we have a claim, we have a warrant, and then we also need to sometimes have a sub warrant that can tie your logic back to fully proving the claim to be true. And so, if you really think about it, a lot of the times the whole sub-warranting race could never end. because we could always find a sub-warrant for the sub-warrant. We could say, okay, interest payments come from taxation. And so then, okay, why does taxation hurt the economy? Taxation hurts the economy because it's a contractionary fiscal policy. It sucks money out of the economy and leads to less spending. Okay, why does sucking money out of the economy hurt the economy? Because it does this. Okay, why does this hurt the economy? So basically, whenever you're proving one thing true, you can kind of go down an endless rabbit hole. So the skill you need to develop is to figure out, okay, when can I stop providing sub warrants for this claim, right? When can I consider this argument to be fully made? All right, so now let's talk about how to warrant at a high level. Because warranting is certainly something that is somewhat difficult, right? It's something where a lot of the time you will need a good deal of skill and experience to actually accomplish. So how is warranting done at a high level? A few things to consider. The first thing is that you need a full explanation. The biggest and most common mistake teams make when they're warranting is not providing a full explanation of themselves. The huge explanation that you make and that lots of teams make is being too blippy, right? There will be some sort of logical justification that they didn't make, that they under-explained. And this, in turn, will make it impossible for the judge to buy the full version of their argument because of the fact that they never provided the full explanation in the first place when they presented the argument. So the full explanation that gets the how and the why out there in a warrant is really the only way that you can be assured of your warrant ultimately mattering. You also need to provide efficient explanations. And so now this is a balancing act between two sort of contradictory principles, right? So we want a full explanation, but we also don't want an explanation that takes too long or provides unnecessary background information, because not only will that distract the judge and will become sort of noise, it will bring them away from the ultimate line of thinking you want them to have that will bring them to an accurate decision of their own, but also it'll detract. It'll take away from the time that you could be spending making other arguments for why you should win the round. So those two things you need to have both of. Now, next of all, when you're warranting, you should use examples to sort of concretize your position, right? And so when I say concretize, I mean sort of like to make it more concrete. I don't know if I'm making up a word there. I could definitely be making up a word. But when you're making a warrant, let's say that we go back to this other slide here, right? And we're talking about the idea that debt hurts the economy. And we're saying, okay, so debt decreases spending power through greater interest payments. So that's all fine and dandy, but that's a very abstract position. It would be a lot better if, as a part of this warrant, I said, okay, so in Germany, when they had high debt, or better yet, in Greece, when they had high debt, they were forced to try and increase taxes because they simply couldn't pay back the people that they had borrowed from. And this created a whole economic crisis for them. And so providing an example with your argument is a great way to make the warrant a lot better. And the reason for this is that a lot of the time judges have trouble thinking and following complex lines of thinking when you're limiting yourself to the purely abstract. And so providing an example lets your position become a lot less abstract and benefits you greatly as a result. One more thing to think about is, what is an example of where your argument happened? This is another area of nebulousness that is needless. A lot of impact scenarios, conflict scenarios, global warming scenarios will just give some sort of number like, okay, yeah, in proxy wars, 200,000 people die. Or because of climate change, 5 million people will get displaced. That's fine, but like, where is this even happening? Because if you can't even say where it's happening, then you haven't even begun to answer most of the important questions that lie in the impacting work that you need to do for your argument. All right, so let's continue discussing high-level warranting. First of all, a warrant is best when it comes from a qualified source. So this is something that's difficult because one of the great beauties of warranting is that it doesn't have to come from a super it doesn't have to come from like a professor at Harvard, right? Like any one of you can come up with a warrant that could be just as good as a warrant came up with anyone else on this Zoom, and you could share it and it would be great. But it really helps if you have authors that are making your warrants for you. And this helps a lot for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that a lot of the time authors will use terminology and explanations that will better phrase things than rather would phrase things in better ways than you would phrase them. And so what that will mean is that the warranting that will come out if and when you're using the language of authors will actually be better than if you were just relying on your own logic. Now, with that being said, you certainly want to rely on your own logic a lot. And one thing I would like to do is I would take a card. I would only read like one or two sentences from the card. And then the rest of it would be based on pretty much my own analysis, right? I would be, I would include maybe like a sentence of my own thinking after a card. If I didn't think that that card actually, you know, fully encapsulated the explanation that I wanted to communicate. So that's one really important consideration, right? Warrant is best when it comes from a qualified source, but it doesn't have to come from a qualified source. The other reason why it's great when your warranting comes from a qualified source is because of the fact that you can then use evidence preference for your warrant rather than just relying on, just having your logic essentially make more sense than the logic that your opponent is using. So yeah, keep those things in mind. The next thing is that you can use statistics to prove your warrants true. And I actually think that statistics can be an important part of warranting. So again, we go back to the example of, okay, debt hurts the economy. If I'm explaining this and I'm explaining, okay, the more debt we have, the more that crowds out the activity of the private sector, the less we'll have economic growth. That warrant is all fine in the theoretical, but the big problem here is that if you don't have a statistic that says, okay, when we have a debt to GDP ratio that exceeds 110%, this empirically leads to a decrease in growth of 4%. When you don't have a statistic like that, then sometimes it can be hard to actually evaluate an argument because the extent of it isn't really clear, right? Like you can just logically prove, like we did with the debt example, that X does or slash can indeed cause Y, but without a statistic, you can't really speak to the extent to which X causes Y. And so that's where statistics can become extremely useful. Second thing here is that statistics also lend more probability to the warrants that you're making, right? If you're trying to provide a warrant and it's just just spitting out logic and words here and there, but you don't have any external validation to go off of, this will probably inhibit your ability to win, say, a more skeptical judge, because what a parent, judge, or coach might think is, okay, fine, like these are big claims, but this is a high schooler ultimately, or I know about this and I have some preconceived notion or bias about why this might be wrong, or maybe if they're just unsure, having a statistic in play is one of the best ways you can possibly separate your warrants from the other warrants being thrown around in the debate. All right, cool. So now let's talk about language of preference. So when we have competing warrants, right? So let's say that I'm arguing A and my opponent is arguing B. I'm saying A causes X. Whether or not X is a good or bad thing doesn't matter. We'll just hold it in the abstract for a moment, right? I'm saying A causes X. My opponent is saying no, B causes X. Now we have competing warrants. We're disagreeing over which side truly causes which thing. And so one of two things can happen at that point. Either one, we can behave as most debaters would behave. We can just go at it on the line by line and it'll be super tight and close and probably confusing, and we can just, see who comes out on top. Or one of us can step back and use language of preference, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can use language of preference, but fundamentally what language of preference is is it's when you say, okay, like listen, we say this, they say the opposite. You should prefer our position because X, Y, Z. That's what language of preference is. So let me give you some examples of what this looks like, right? So one thing you can say, all right, so you should prefer my argument because we assume X, right? We assume this factor that they don't assume. So let's take it back to the debt to GDP growth example. You could say, okay, prefer my argument because we assume in our warranting that a large portion of this money that gets issued for the debt actually goes to other countries. And so the fact that we assume this means that it gets taken out of circulation in the US and slows the economy more. They did not assume this dynamic when they presented their warrant. So that's a great reason why you can say, okay, hey, prefer my argument here. Next reason is you can say prefer my argument because we better explain why. This is where you can get a little bit meta, right? You can kind of be like, okay, we actually did a better job at, like, basically in your warrant comparison. You can say, okay, we did a better job of explaining this important dynamic than they did. Therefore, you should be on our side. You should vote for us. This requires a pretty sound eye for what's happening on the flow. It also requires a substantial ability to explain what they didn't explain, right? You have to spot missing assumptions that they forgot to justify while simultaneously providing your own competing reasoning and in that vein your own justified assumptions for the judge and whatnot to grab onto. So yeah, do that. Super useful stuff. There's a lot more reasons to, or there's a lot more ways to do language of preference. The next way is, so okay, so you should prefer my argument because our evidence is better in X way. This is where you rely on your evidence to do your language of preference. This is a very common one because it's a very easy one, right? So let's say that I'm making a claim supported by a warrant and it makes intuitive sense. Now my opponent countered this by making their own claim with a warrant. I could easily say, let's say that this is an analytical position. I could say, okay, fine, right? We're just high schoolers making assertions. My assertion is backed by a Nobel laureate. Theirs is just abstraction that they invented on the spot. Judge, you should vote for which you think is more likely to be true, and having ethos, having an expert opinion behind one of them, is going to make mine more likely to be correct. So yeah, that's about it for language of preference. So now we're going to take a super brief intermission. There's about 4 or 5 of you here. So why don't you all think of questions, and in the meantime, we'll take like a 3-ish minute break for you all to stand up, stretch, walk around, and then we'll start back up at 6:25. We'll finish the rest of the lecture, and then we'll do the Q&A section at the end. So in the meantime, if you have any questions, type them in the chat, and then I'll answer them when we get back, and then we'll do another Q&A right at the end. And thankfully, we actually have a small group here, which means we can probably have like a vocal discussion at the end if you guys just want to speak up and have a chat. So yeah, we'll do that. We'll take a, let's say 3-ish minute break. All right, I'm back. Break is over. Don't see any questions, so let's get back into it. All right. Boom, boom. All right, so now let's get into logical refutation. Um, so the best way to get really effective at logically refuting something is to look at an argument and then understand that the argument is a series of link chains that are all kind of tethered together. And so the best way that you can break down that argument is to identify each of the component parts of it and then come up with some reason to refute all of these parts and come up with the reasons why the whole thing is wrong, and go at every different interval and come up with just analytics as to why each one may be incorrect. This method is particularly effective. This is the method that I was taught when I would go to debate camps, when I would be at Blake, as a great method for logical refutation. And it's a great method because it can be applied essentially to any and every argument that exists out there. Every argument will be a series of assumptions. And so step 0 is sort of identifying those assumptions before you then break them all down. So let's take an example of what that might look like. So let's look at the argument here, right? Which is that, okay, if the U.S. doesn't leave NATO, NATO will solve World War III. And so the converse then is the real assertion, which is that, okay, if the U.S. leaves NATO, then we're going to have a World War III happen. So that's the argument, right? So the first internal link here is that the U.S. would ever leave NATO. Now, assuming that this wasn't the resolution itself, we could come up with the reasons why this wouldn't happen. We could say, okay, domestic political pressure would make it such that the U.S. would never leave NATO. We could say, for economic reasons, the U.S. would not want to anger all of our trading partners in Europe. Therefore, we wouldn't want to leave or pull back from NATO. We could also make domestic political arguments like, hey, look who's in office. Joe Biden is not somebody that's going to just pull out of NATO. So point is, this is one step in the internal link, and there are many different reasons that we can falsify it analytically. The next internal link is that the organization gets weaker after the U.S. leaves, right? Okay, what if that wasn't true? What if the U.S. being in this organization made it more controversial and more militaristic and therefore more threatening to Russia, which actually means that America's presence in NATO only made Russia more angry and destabilized the situation further? What if we could say, okay, the organization won't get weaker because these countries, with or without NATO, are still under America's nuclear umbrella, which means that functionally speaking, the organization won't become any weaker than it was before. So the next one here is the assumption that the organization needs the U.S. to deter effectively. Okay, many reasons why this may not be the case as well. Let's say the U.S. leaves. That would probably lead to a lot of these nations stepping up to the plate and increasing their relative defense commitments and making sure that they are still a strong organization that is able to deter Russia or anybody else, right? Um, Another reason why the idea that the organization used the U.S. to deter might be wrong is that, pre-NATO, they didn't need this, right? Pre-NATO, they still weren't getting invaded or anything. So history would tell us that they don't need the U.S. to deter. Another logical point here is that, okay, let's think about the counterfactual. This is another critical point when we're talking about logical refutation. What exactly is the counterfactual, right? If it wasn't for the U.S. in these organizations, how exactly would they act? I would argue that many of them would act in a much more predictable manner. The U.S. goes through big swings in its sort of like bipolar political construction every 4 years, where every 4 years you might have someone totally different in office from the last person. So Trump, for example, famously would flout these international organizations, would criticize a lot of these countries for not contributing enough, while America contributes relatively too much. And so you could say, okay, yeah, the organization doesn't need the U.S. to deter. The U.S. is just kind of like an added distraction in some ways, and it's one that isn't even really helpful to the goal of the organization. Okay, so the final internal link is that a Russian invasion would in fact happen if it wasn't for the organization of NATO, right? That is also a bold claim. There's a million reasons why Russia would never want to invade with or without NATO. First of all, this would be inviting a war with the Baltic states, who are kind of they've been conceived to be horrified of the reach of Russia, of the Iron Curtain, whatnot, and so they have these total defense strategies that they have adopted and created, where their official policy is like, okay, if Russia invades us, we are literally going to have every single person out here in the street shooting back to make sure that we don't lose to Russia. So I think that's one reason Russia might not want to deter or might not want to invade. Another reason why they might not want to invade is because of the fact that they are not super strong economically speaking. They have an aging population. They're kind of like a waning power in many ways, which would mean they would be looking at these countries and being like, can we really handle another war? The answer to that question is probably no. And so now the last thing here is that if there's a Russian invasion, that would in fact cause World War III. If a Russian invasion did happen, it might be the more logical course of action to just be like, all right, Russia, listen, like you can have Lithuania, you can have like whatever, Baltic state you want. We are not going to want to escalate with you because we don't want World War III. Mutually assured destruction up until this point has always succeeded. It has never failed. Two nuclear armed states have never started flinging nukes at each other, even though India and Pakistan had the Kargil War in the 1990s. That's pretty much the only time, I believe, when two nuclear armed states were ever in direct conflict. So the point there is that it's really unlikely that even in a terrible scenario, nuclear armed powers would actually start going to war with one another and would start, flinging nukes at one another. So, yeah, that's a very critical point. An invasion would not necessarily cause World War III. So this is all just one example of one argument, right? What we did here is we broke the argument down into 5 assumptions that it relied on, right? It relied on the US leaving, the organization getting weaker, the organization essentially needing the US to deter anything, then the organization ever being capable of deterring a Russian invasion in the first place, and then finally an invasion causing World War III. So this relied on all of those different things. Now, we found reasons why all of them might not be true. And this is something that we can do with any range of arguments. We can look at an argument, we can identify all of the assumptions that comprise the argument, and then we can break those assumptions down such that you can actually have a very comprehensive rebuttal with a lot of really good coverage without cards if you don't have them. It's also worth noting that this is a bit of a last resort. You don't want to be just going straight up no cards in every rebuttal. It's always better to have solid prep against an argument and to know how to respond to it in such a way where you're not, worrying about having to write out the entirety of the rebuttal in the prep before the rebuttal. Sometimes that'll lead to a great rebuttal. Other times it will lead to a not so great rebuttal. Point is, logical refutation like this is a great thing to do when either first your opponent's argument is just illogical and logical stabs are the best way to take the argument out. Second of all, it's an excellent way to deal with squirrely arguments. I think this is probably the best antidote to squirrely arguments. Squirrely arguments are predominantly effective because of the fact that they're confusing and people don't have pre-written responses to them. This fact also means that frequently these arguments are the most poorly constructed and the most illogical because of the simple fact that, okay, if this argument was so great, then why isn't everyone running it? Sometimes a team really did just stumble upon something that's genius and brilliant, and fundamental and gets them a lot of offense, most of the time there is a reason why this is not being written about in the literature. And so logical refutation against a squirrely argument is a great way to is a great way to go. So now let's think a little bit more about logical refutation here. So what can you do to make that sort of like step-by-step pass through of the link chain? What can you do to make that more effective? A couple of things can be done. The first is that you can group common assumptions that the entire contention relies on, and then cover those really heavily. So let's go back to this one, right? I think the entire one assumption the entire contention relies on is that NATO is a force for peace. That's kind of reliant that's implicit in the entirety of the position of the argument. So if you wanted to impact her on that, you could give a bunch of reasons why NATO is bad. Then that would be useful because of the fact that regardless of which link, which warrant, which impact they go for, they would need to respond to those assertions. When you group common assumptions that the entire contention relies on, then you make it impossible for them to kick out of your responses. And you also make it such so that they have more work to do. If they have 2 links and you make 4 responses on the link level, let's say 2 of them are on the first link only, 2 of them are on the second link only, then they'll have to frontline 2 responses when they go for their link, as long as they weren't necessarily non-uniques. If you were to say make 5 responses and 3 of them were grouping the links together, and then there was 1 response per link, then they would have to frontline 4 responses, depending on which link they went for. So just with adding 1 response, you can make them do twice the work. And the reason you can do this is because you were smart about grouping the common assumptions that the entire contention relies on. Common assumptions are a lot of the time the biggest vulnerability in a contention. Because again, when you start debating at a high level, a lot of the time it becomes a numbers game. It becomes a question of how much can you do with the allotted time in your speech. And more often than not, the answer to that question will determine the outcome of the round. So whenever you're refuting logically, you want to identify the big holes and things that it's not easy for them to kick out of. The next thing here is that practice makes perfect. I really can't emphasize enough how important it is to practice logical refutation, and also how easy it is to practice logical refutation. So I want to make 2 points about this. The first point here is that whenever you're practicing logical refutation, it makes sense to use one of your cases, either on the present topic or on a past topic. The reason for this is because A, it'll help show you where you make mistakes in case construction. Do you go too late on the warranting for your impact? Are you bad at showing why your link leads to your impact? It'll help make you into a better case writer, or your partner into a better case writer, if you're now taking a super critical eye to the work that you had done in the past on the cases. The second thing to think about is that whenever you're on a new topic and you're, say, running a new case, and somebody and you're going to get responses to that case, take, if you're a second speaker, 5 to 10 minutes, just write down like as many responses to your case as you can possibly think of. And then all the ones that you think are reasonable or could be good or could be difficult to respond to, write those down and make sure that you have a good front line to them, because those are the responses that you're going to wind up hearing a lot of the time. So when you practice logical refutation, it not only helps you get better at logical refutation, but it also will help you win your case more often, because it'll deepen your understanding of, okay, what do I need to frontline, and then how do I actually frontline it? One other critical thing about practicing this is you want to identify each step in the link chain. And this is one skill, it's so easy to practice when you're by yourself and when you're, just trying to improve sitting in your house. You need to identify each step in the link chain. You need to come up with reasons why they're all first wrong. And before that, you need to just identify them. You need to see them first. And then from there, you can get to refuting them. If you have an old case from the January topic, go do that. If your friend sent you some case that he thought was really good, go try to refute that. Give yourself 5 minutes to do it, and then give yourself 4 minutes to give a speech. And early on, you probably won't be able to fill the whole speech up. You might be trailing off. You might not be able to generate enough responses quantitatively. All that, that's fine. That's to be expected. The goal is that you become more and more comfortable with giving great analytical rebuttals such that you get to a point where you're always filling up your speech time. And really, in the end, you feel like there's limitless numbers of things I could say against this argument. There are so many different assumptions that I can identify here. And there's so many reasons why any one of those assumptions may be wrong that I'm never going to run out of material, as it were. So yeah, practice makes perfect. I've done, 100, 200 logical rebuttals for practice in my life, and then, many more in round. And yeah, this is just one skill where the more you do it, the better you're going to be and the smoother you're going to be. And speaking style matters too. You don't want to be umming and ahhing your way through these rebuttals. You want to be persuasive. You want to be put together, etc. Okay, so now let's look at part 3. Super useful thing you can do is question the assumptions of their studies. So the natural area where you will be behind as someone who's trying to come up with logical responses to a case is that you'll be behind on the ethos of these arguments, right? You will just be making assertions, whereas your opponents will actually have quantifications, they'll have statistics, they'll have studies, all sorts of things. And so this will put you at a disadvantage because when you're just saying things, you're going to be less believed than the authors that they're citing. One way that you can get around this is, particularly when you're dealing with studies, is you can question the assumption of their studies. You can make a logical argument and then be like, they say that they found a 70% decrease in FDI with this. However, this study is based off of logical assumptions. If I prove those assumptions wrong with my logical arguments, then they no longer win this statistic, right? Every study is founded on a set of assumptions, and it also has some sort of finite data set. When you can implicate the evidence or the studies of your opponents in your logical refutation, you're going to be so much better for it, and your arguments are going to be so much more effective. The next thing you need to do is weigh. Logical refutation is really effective when you're doing comparative work between your contention and their contention. This can look like link weighing. It can look like impact weighing. One way or another, you want to be characterizing why the world of your case is so much better than the world of their case. Weighing is one of the most important ways to do this, and it also lets you get out ahead of the pack and out ahead of whatever arguments they're trying to make. Whenever you can come in early and be like, okay, listen, if we win our first contention, this beats their contention in 3 ways. And also we outweigh in XYZ way. And it's also a great thing to do when you don't have/can't come up with great direct substantive clash responses. You can fall back on your case more. Your own case can be a really powerful tool to, do logical refutation with. You can grab individual pieces of evidence and then extrapolate analytically from that evidence, or you can take the whole case and then weigh the whole case against their case. Bottom line, keep it simple. Complexity is good, but too much complexity is bad. And in debate, you want to be saying things with as little complexity as you can. You want to keep it as simple as you possibly can, because first of all, judges getting confused may be the leading cause of losing rounds. And second of all, when you keep it simple, you're more efficient. And like I said before, that means that you're playing the numbers game at a more effective and at a more advanced level. So yeah, that's about it. So now I want to talk to you guys about our club team. I know a couple of you here I've already talked to about this, and I'm super excited to hear that you may be joining us. But I just wanted to go over this a little bit more. Now, in our club team, we will be offering everything I had access to at Blake and more to all of our students. We're going to be creating the biggest and best prep group that I think PF has ever seen. There's truly nothing like it. There's nothing that is going to be run as effectively and as efficiently as this is going to be run. We're taking a lot of the knowledge and the expertise that I was privy to as a captain on Blake for 2 years. Same with my partner Morgan, and we're applying it to this club team. On this club team, we're going to take a group. We anticipate 10-ish partnerships, but we've only started pushing it in the last couple of weeks, and we're anticipating having 100% dedicated teams who are putting in work, who are sharing materials. And this blueprint has gotten kids in TOC finals and LD back to back years. So the blueprint of this club team is extraordinarily successful. It's just going to add so much wind in your sails as debaters. If you come from a school program that isn't like a truly elite program, you are fighting an extraordinarily uphill battle. Like if it's you versus equally qualified opponents, if those opponents have these type of resources at their disposal, majority of the time they're going to win. And that's going to make it so much harder than it needs to be for you to win elim rounds. And so that's our real goal for this club team, is to turn, really competent debaters into teams that can win tournaments, that can literally get into different colleges because of their debate success. That's what we want to do. And that's what I know we can do with this club team. So if you're interested in that, shoot me a message, schedule a call. I would love to work with any and all of you. But yeah, a bit smaller of a group today. We are about at the time for questions. So does anyone have any questions? If so, you can either speak up or just drop it in the chat. Also, Danny, I just realized you texted me. I need to respond to you. So let me do that right now. In the meantime, go ahead and drop some questions. All right, cool. Answering Moon Young's question, would it be wise to apply logical reasoning to impacts? Yes, absolutely. Impacts are certainly an area where you can take scenarios that people have crafted and really question them a lot. One really great way to apply logic reasoning is clarity of impact. A lot of the time, people's impacts will be too nebulous. I talked about this earlier. Another great way to do it is incentive analysis, right? every impact will have a group of stakeholders that are relevant. So these might be economic institutions, these might be the central banks of these countries, or the companies involved in these countries, and they'll say things like, "Oh, we're going to see a massive drop in FDI." Well, would the government want this to happen? Would it be in their control for whether or not this happened? If the answer to either of those is yes, then there's a good chance that it wouldn't happen, and there would be some sort of intervening actor that would prevent this negative event from occurring. So, yeah, great question. Yes, impacts are absolutely somewhere that you can apply this reasoning. Arian says, what should the trade-off be between logical refutations and carded responses? Should you try to aim for evidence-backed rebuttal 99% of the time, or what? Honestly, the trade-off is just whatever makes the speech the best. A lot of the time, your speech will be 100% carded. Sometimes it'll be 50% carded. You just want to be making the best possible arguments, and I think that's totally context specific. I would say you want to try to have a majority of your responses be carded, but between that and like 100%, I think it's all just up to you. It's just based on like how, like what lets you make the best arguments. Certain things you won't be able to find a card for because for whatever reason nobody has just written about it, and then at that point it just sort of is what it is. In other circumstances that will not be the case. So yeah, sorry for not giving you a super direct answer, but honestly, the truth is just that it's so variable. Like it just totally depends on the situation. All right, guys. Is there any other questions?
Yeah, Jack. So, like, when I'm giving like an analytical rebuttal, I tend to like point out like there's no warrant for like X, Y, or Z. So would you consider that like a terminal defense like response, or is there any way to make it like more persuasive? Is that more like weighing?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely not terminal defense. Like, terminal defense is a phrase I think that definitely gets overused in PF. Like, terminal defense is literally like, okay, there's literally no way they could possibly have any offense whatsoever after this. Actual terminal defense is pretty rare. So that's not terminal defense. But one thing I would say, if you want to make your no warrant responses better, I would say, okay, they say X. They don't provide a warrant for why X is true. If anything, X is false because blah, blah, blah. So now not only have you pointed out that they don't have a warrant, but you've also provided a counter warrant for why this assumption that they forgot to justify is actually more likely to be false than true. And so now that you've provided this, now that you've explained this, it's going to be a lot harder for them to kind of crawl out of that hole. So yeah, that would be my advice for how to make your responses there better. Alrighty. Anything else? All right. If not, I suppose we can wrap up a few minutes early. Thank you guys for attending. Hope you enjoyed. I will see you at the next seminar. Peace.